In today's episode of the Daily Brief, I'll talk about two interesting stories. I first talk about Indian dairy navigating some rough pastures this quarter, and finally, I talk about the companies behind funding India's green shift. Welcome back to the Daily Brief show by Zerodha, where our aim is to simplify the biggest news in the financial markets in a way that's one level deeper as compared to news channels. I'm your host Akshara, and today is Thursday, 13th November. Coming to the first story. So, India is the world's largest milk producer, churning out nearly a quarter of global supply. To us, milk and dairy products are staples, with over a billion liters of milk alone consumed daily across the country. Some months ago, we broke down the economics of the dairy industry in our analysis of the Milky Mist IPO. Now, some of the biggest milk companies in India are cooperatives like Amul, which are not listed. We'll be looking into the top three listed companies in the sector: Hatsun Agro, Dodla Dairy, and Heritage Foods. Their results, interestingly, diverge wildly. But underneath this variation lies the same structural trends that are shaping India's milk industry. Let's get into it. So, three major private dairy companies reported vastly different Q2 performances. In a commodity that seems as simple as milk, such divergence should ideally seem uncommon. But it has happened. Hatsun Agro, India's largest listed private dairy, had the most impressive quarter of the three. Its revenue jumped 17% year on year to rupees 2,428 crore. But the highlight was its profit after tax, or PAT, which soared by a whopping 73% year on year to rupees 110 crore. The results of Heritage Foods, however, stood in stark contrast compared to Hatsun. Its revenue grew 9% to rupees 1,113 crore, but profitability has taken a hit. The EBITDA has fallen by 1.2% from last quarter and 7% from last year. Heritage's day-to-day operations, it seems, are finding it hard to make money. Dodla Dairy sits somewhat in between these two. Its revenue grew at a modest 2.1% year over year to rupees 1,019 crore. Last year's revenue figures, however, included rupees 165 crore in bulk commodity sales that Dodla intentionally curtailed. Excluding those low-margin bulk trades, the company's underlying revenue growth was actually 13%. PAT was up 4% to approximately rupees 66 crore. Now, the first reason for such divergent financial outcomes is milk inflation. Heritage and even Dodla to some degree saw their margins squeezed by a sharp spike in the price of raw milk, and Heritage pretty much admitted this in their con call. Now, the second quarter of any year is usually a lean season for milk production. Cows produce less milk in the summer and monsoon months. Meanwhile, farmers take the benefit of the rains to grow more fodder to feed their cattle ahead of the flush season, which starts from the third quarter. So, in Q2, demand naturally outpaces supply, leading to higher milk prices. However, Q2 of this year has been unusually bad, and all the figures point to one suspect: the weather. Here's Heritage talking about it.
Thank you, Samir. This quarter, our performance was about 15%, and this performance is at least 5% below our own internal expectations. That's all I can say. So, our internal expectation and our internal targets are at least 5 or 6% higher than what we are delivering now. And the prime reason, there is only one reason that I can attribute this to, which is the weather. Because we look at the numbers on an everyday basis.
So, the southwest monsoon, which brings rains to much of India in Q2, has been excessively heavy and unpredictably long, causing floods. We've covered before how this unpredictability has hurt demand for coolers and AC. And it turns out, milk has not escaped the weather's wrath either. Floods and waterlogged fields disrupted fodder availability and made milk collection from villages very difficult. But if that's the reason, shouldn't the entire industry have been hit equally? Why did Heritage alone bear its brunt? The answer lies in geography, where these companies procure milk from. Most of Heritage's procurement is concentrated in just two states, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Those were the two states hit worst by the rains this quarter. As a result, Heritage procured 2% less milk compared to last year and at prices that were 6% higher than last year. Meanwhile, Heritage has not been able to fully pass on higher prices to consumers, hurting their margins. Dodla and Hatsun, in contrast, are much better diversified regionally. While both of them do have exposure to AP and Telangana, they're not as heavily dependent on those two states as Heritage. Recently, Hatsun also acquired Odisha based Milky Moo, giving them a ready made base there. This wider base allowed both Dodla and Hatsun to increase milk procurement compared to last year. And just to add salt to Heritage's wounds, a shortage of butter and ghee made things worse. Recently, global butter prices surged to multi year highs, prompting Indian producers to ramp up exports. Meanwhile, despite high prices, domestic ghee consumption stayed robust. Low butter stocks forced dairies to procure more milk to extract cream, worsening the milk shortage. In a strange twist of irony, our love for ghee created a scarcity of milk itself. So, Heritage has been bitten by the four horsemen of the milk apocalypse: a cyclically leaner Q2, bad weather, regional mix, and increased demand for butter. Now, a huge talking point for milk producers this quarter was the growing importance of value added products or VAP like curd, ice cream, paneer, cheese, flavored milk, and so on, all of which carry higher margins than regular milk. But each of our three players is playing the VAP game differently. Hatsun, of course, is playing this game the best. Close to half of its revenue comes from VAP, much higher than its competitors. It's a market leader in several VAP categories, most notably ice cream. You've probably seen Arun ice cream in your average grocery store, at least if you're from South India. Arun is Hatsun's crown jewel and is one of the biggest ice cream brands in all of India. In fact, Hatsun began as an ice cream business before moving into milk. The Arun brand is one of the biggest reasons why, even when milk procurement costs have risen, Hatsun has yielded superior numbers. And ice cream has, well, sweeter margins than other VAP like curd, butter, and ghee. Yet, ice cream is far from the only VAP Hatsun has established market leadership in. As per their con call, it seems their curd and butter brands are doing very well too. This focus on VAP is why their profits grew by 70% from last year. And now they're doubling down with plans of launching a range of high protein dairy products. Now, Heritage and Dodla are behind Hatsun in this race, but they aren't sitting still either. Heritage's VAP contributed 38% of all sales in Q2, of which curd made up 70%. VAP revenues grew 18%, far faster than regular milk, and they're doubling down on these lines as well. Heritage has been spending rupees 150 crore in capex annually to build capacity in products like ice cream, yogurt, and paneer, hoping to structurally make the business more profitable in time. Dodla has historically been a milk-centric business. This quarter, however, VAP made up 30% of revenue, and even with VAP, curd made up over 70% of sales. This over-reliance on a single product could become a risk, but Dodla is actively investing to expand its VAP range. Compared to Hatsun, however, both Dodla and Heritage are playing catch-up, despite heavy investments in VAP. Even within VAP, they're heavily reliant on lower-margin products like curd, which spoils easily. Hatsun's top-notch ice cream business puts it on a different plane. If anything, Hatsun's lead is growing larger. Its early investments in capacity, cold chain infrastructure, and so on are bearing fruit right now. For instance, a few years ago, Hatsun commissioned a mega dairy plant at Govindapur, Telangana. While initially it might have run at low utilization, now Hatsun is enjoying higher utilization on this plant as demand catches up. Hatsun also invested early in establishing a fully refrigerated supply chain, the first dairy company in India transporting milk and VAP 100% under refrigerated conditions. All of this adds to its margins. What's also given Hatsun's ship more wind in its sails is the new GST regime. Products like ghee, butter, and cheese were earlier taxed at 12%. Under the new GST rules, however, this rate has now been cut to 5%. Paneer similarly went from 5% to 0%, but pure milk remained unchanged at 0%. Compared to Heritage and Dodla, Hatsun's portfolio is much more heavily tilted towards VAP that enjoyed a tax break due to the latest reforms. Which is why it's really hopeful of a further boost in its VAP sales. Something that we found while researching these brands is that seemingly brand loyalty matters a lot in dairy. The idea is that once consumers take a liking to a particular brand of milk or VAP, they're unlikely to switch to any other brand. So a strong brand recall might really help. Here's Hatsun exhibiting their extremely strong belief in brand in a blunt, hilarious way. That's right. Actually, someone just came to me and he was saying milk is not a value added item. And I told him, you go tell your wife and ask her to change the brand of milk that she's using. And she may not change the brand, but she may change you. So, brand matters. It's just not anything else. But Hatsun might have a point here. Having started in 1970, Hatsun has built some iconic 1,000 crore brands over decades, allowing it to develop a loyalty that it can charge a premium for. And it seems like this brand premium does show up in the numbers. Hatsun's EBITDA margins this quarter are 13.4%, way above Dodla's 9.1% and Heritage 6.9%. Heritage and Dodla, which started much later than Hatsun, don't enjoy the same kind of brand trust. But they too know just how important it is. Heritage has ramped up marketing spend significantly, which has helped raise awareness rates and trial rates for their products, while Dodla has been expanding its brand initiatives across television, OTT, and even physical festival sites. Now, in these results, we've gotten a sense of what milk companies hold most dear to them. Milk procurement became costlier this quarter, and not because companies have fallen asleep at the wheel. The weather, and maybe climate change more broadly, has played spoil sport, especially for businesses that were too reliant on regions heavily exposed to excessive rains. Value added products and brand differentiation also play a huge role in the chase of higher margins. But what also matters is scale and timing, which has significantly benefited Hatsun. Heritage and Dodla are only making their big moves now, and we can't say for sure if their big bets will eventually upset the industry. Even without other headwinds, that road is steep with no clarity on the destination. Now, coming to the second story. India is in the middle of a massive energy transition. We're building renewable energy, upgrading the existing network, revamping our electricity distribution, and much more. According to the National Electricity Plan, India's power capacity may reach 609 gigawatt by 2027 and 900 gigawatt by 2032. But this won't come cheap. To get there, we'll require an estimated rupees 32 lakh crore in capital spending from FY26 to 32. Now, typically, 3 of every 4 rupees spent on such projects is funded by debt. Our grand project of energy transition then will need lakhs of crores in loans. Yet, traditional banks are hesitant to jump in, and for good reason. Not long ago, power companies dragged Indian banking into a massive NPA hole. Loans of rupees 1.74 lakh crore going sour, which took them the better part of a decade to escape. So, where does the money come from then? Well, most of that burden has now fallen on a special class of institutions. There are companies, often government backed, that dedicate themselves purely for funding power projects called Power Infrastructure Finance Companies or PIFCs. The big three are Power Finance Corporation or PFC, REC Limited or REC, and Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency or IREDA. These have become the primary lenders for power projects, funding the majority of India's power sector debt, as much as 52% of outstanding power sector loans as of March 2025. And their share in the sector's financing is still rising even as the share of banks has declined. Between 2020 to 2025, PIFCs expanded their loan books at a CAGR of around 11.5%. This might not sound like much, but consider it in its context. Through much of the 2010s, the sector saw a period of stagnation and even degrowth. From that base, this is an impressive comeback. This period has also seen major shifts in who they lend to. Now, much of this lending used to be to traditional thermal power generation projects, but that's changing fast. Loans for renewables projects, for instance, rose from about 10% of the total portfolio in 2020 to roughly 17% by 2025. At the same time, lending to coal power plants fell sharply from nearly half of all loans in 2020 to just 27% in 2025. Traditionally, PIFCs lent most to government owned utilities like state electricity boards, state generation companies, etc., and these still made up over 80% of their loan books. But there's a gradual shift here as well. Private players, mainly renewable power producers, now account for 15 to 20% of loans, from about 10% 5 years ago. That's partly because the economics of renewables have improved dramatically. Plus, the government's push for energy transition and easier access to green finance have made private developers more active and credit-worthy, encouraging NBFCs and banks to lend more confidently to them. So, what explains the growth in the sector's lending? This isn't merely a product of more organic, market driven demand. A lot of the surge has been policy driven. In recent years, the government has launched special programs to revive or reform the power sector. Companies like PFC or REC often serve as the nodal financing agencies for these schemes. That is, these companies are made accountable for those schemes and become a single point of contact for companies that want to avail of it. For instance, during COVID, the government rolled out a liquidity infusion scheme or LIS to bail out discoms paired with a late payment surcharge or LPS scheme to clear the huge backlog of unpaid power bills discoms owed generators. The money for these rescue packages was disbursed by PFC and REC, and in their books, this looked like a spike in their loan disbursements. But these were, in fact, one off programs driven by the government. And much of the pump in PIFC's loan book in recent years comes from such schemes. As those schemes wind down, there's a new policy push, the Revamped Distribution Sector Scheme or RDSS. Now, this is a government initiative to reform electricity distribution, things like installing millions of smart meters or upgrading wires and substations. Once again, PFC and REC have been made the nodal agencies for RDSS, and that shows up in their numbers. PFC, for instance, has approved over Rs 1.17 lakh crore of loans for various RDSS projects by late 2023 alone. With this in mind, let's turn to how the big three PIFC companies are doing through their latest quarterly results. So, Power Finance Corporation is the largest of the trio and a parent of REC. Its loan book spans generation, transmission, and distribution, and lately it's even added non power infrastructure to the mix. If there's a big Indian power project, chances are PFC is involved. And PFC just delivered solid results. In the first half of FY26, its consolidated profit after tax was a best ever Rs 16,816 crore, up 17% from last year. Its loan book expanded to approximately Rs 11.43 lakh crore, roughly 10% up year on year by the close of September 2025. Behind this growth was the funding it gave to renewable energy projects as well as its large disbursements to distribution companies under schemes like RDSS. Now, PFC's asset quality looks remarkably good for a lender in the infrastructure space. Its gross NPAs fell to just 1.45% by the first half of FY26. This was an improvement of 117 basis points in just a year as the company resolved some long-stressed power projects and recovered past dues. Its net NPAs, meanwhile, are almost negligible at 0.3%. So, how did it manage such clean books? PFC benefits from its heavy exposure to state entities. When these are in trouble, their loans are often restructured or backed by a state guarantee. These are never classified as bad loans, no matter how long their payments are pending. Meanwhile, purely commercial lenders would have to label a defaulting borrower as NPA. So, the main takeaway from PFC's pristine 1.45% NPA is that loans to state utilities are inherently protected. The risk the company takes is much more visible in its private sector lending, where NPAs stand at over approximately 7.7%. Now, PFC is gradually shifting its own lending in line with India's energy trends. It still finances big thermal plants, but there are hardly any new ones coming up. Renewables are where its growth is coming from, as PFC's management noted. The yield on these loans, however, is slightly low, with intense competition to lend to the segment. Now let's talk about REC Limited or REC. REC historically focused on financing distribution networks and rural electrification, and that's where 88% of its lending still goes. It's always been the go-to financier for the government's distribution schemes. It was the nodal agency for the government's 100% household electrification drive and is currently a nodal agency for RDSS. This does, however, mean that REC's fortunes often rise and fall with government policy pushes. Most of its loan book, like PFC, is dominated by government companies, which make up roughly 86% of its lending. Large chunks of that is lent to distribution companies and state electricity boards. Over time, however, REC has been entering newer segments. As a Maharatna PSU, its footprint is now visible across different segments. In fact, REC has outpaced PFC in diversification. About 12% of its portfolio is now in non power infrastructure like metro, sports, and other government projects. Meanwhile, just 3% of PFC's lending goes there. Like PFC, REC too had a great half year. The company's own borrowing costs were low and it took low credit losses. This gave the company its highest ever half yearly profit with a PAT of Rs 8,877 crore, 19% above last year. Meanwhile, its loan book grew to Rs 5.82 lakh crore, 7% higher than last year. That looks relatively moderate, but consider that REC had already seen a bump from scheme lending in recent years. Much like PFC, REC too benefits from the fact that its loans to state entities rarely turn into write offs. This makes its asset quality front seem exceptionally clean, with net impaired assets at just 0.24% of loans and gross NPAs around 1%. And now let's talk about Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency or IREDA. The Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency or IREDA is the smallest of the trio. But while niche, its role is crucial. It's run under the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and focuses exclusively on renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. It's been instrumental in funding solar, wind, and hydro projects, and with time, it's also focusing on emerging areas like green hydrogen and energy storage. Unlike PFC, REC, which lend heavily to state run entities, a large number of IREDA's borrowers are from the private sector, although it does fund some public sector renewables like solar parks. This makes IREDA's business somewhat different. It's more specialized and historically has a somewhat higher credit risk. As India transitions its electricity mix, IREDA is growing rapidly. Its loan book stood at approximately Rs 84,477 crore at the close of September 2025, a whopping 31% higher than a year ago. With this larger book, along with stable interest spreads, its operating profit jumped approximately 52% year on year, and this makes it the fastest growing of the three power IFCs in discussion. However, its bottom line growth was much more muted. At Rs 796 crore, its Q2 profit after tax was just 3% higher than last year. Now, this could be the result of higher provisions or borrowing costs. Notably, one of IREDA's borrowers slipped into NPA in mid 2025 due to a court order involving tariff issues in Andhra Pradesh. This may have forced IREDA to book a provision. Now, this hints at a larger phase of IREDA's business. While business is growing fast, its loan book also shows pockets of stress. Its gross NPA ratio is about 3.2%, far higher than PFC REC's approximately 1% levels. That's simply the reality of lending to numerous private projects in the somewhat untested space of renewable energy. As government led vehicles that are pouring funds into areas that desperately need development, each of these three companies are indispensable in financing India's energy transition. But there are nuances to consider. A significant part of PFC and REC's recent growth spurt has come from government schemes, many of which are one off or short term pushes. Once a scheme runs its course, disbursements under that program stop. For example, the LPS scheme for clearing DISCOM dues gave a big boost to loan books in FY 24-25, but those were lump sum emergency loans. Similarly, RDSS is fueling a lot of lending now, but it has a fixed outlay and timeline. This makes their numbers lumpy. Unless there's a continuous pipeline of new schemes, PIFCs could face a growth slowdown. This opens up a question of sustainability. Can these companies keep up double digit loan growth once the current programs peak? Low NPAs are not the whole story. So, as we've noted before, the impressive NPA numbers at PFC and REC come from their exposure to government owned entities, which essentially carry an implicit sovereign guarantee. And so, stress doesn't always translate into an NPA in their books. But crucially, that doesn't mean that stress is absent. It's just not reported. For instance, many state discoms are in poor financial shape, but their loans from PFC REC are still considered standard. That doesn't mean these companies will receive payments in time. The quality of their assets needs monitoring beyond the headline numbers. By contrast, IREDA's higher NPA ratio, approximately 3%, offers a peek into the actual stress levels in parts of the power sector. Now, PFC and REC have enjoyed very healthy net interest margins in recent years, approximately 3.5 to 3.6%. They've benefited from low funding costs at one end and decent yields at the other. However, going forward, those margins could face pressure. As more lenders chase renewable energy projects, the competition is heating up, as we saw with PFC's yield on assets. Another factor is the interest rate cycle. If interest rates stabilize or fall, PIFCs will see their asset yields adjust down while their own borrowing costs might come down with a lag if they've locked in higher rate funding earlier. Their margins, therefore, might compress a bit. So, at their core, PFC, REC, and IREDA are lenders. But calling them just that misses the point. Their growth, profitability, and even risk appetite are constantly shaped by external forces: government policy, energy transition priorities, and the fiscal health of state utilities. Often, their lending isn't driven by market demands, but by where the government needs capital to flow. That means these aren't traditional lending stories where margins and NPAs tell the full tale. They are a way to get exposure to India's power transition anchored in policy. If you're assessing these companies, look at the sectoral direction, state finances, and reform momentum. Those, rather than traditional financial metrics, are where the real story lies. Now, coming to the tidbits. Novo Nordisk has slashed prices of its obesity drug Wegovy in India by up to 33%. Wegovy's lowest dose of 0.25 mg is now priced at approximately Rs 10,850, down from over Rs 16,000 earlier. Coming to the next tidbit. JSW Steel is reportedly planning to offload 50% of its stake in Bhushan Power and Steel Limited, or BPSL, worth approximately Rs 16,000 crore. This was right after the Supreme Court upheld JSW's acquisition of BPSL after a long battle in court. Now, coming to the final tidbit. India's refiners will receive their full-term crude oil allocations from Saudi Arabia and Iraq for December 2025, while also allowing more optional contracts. Some Middle Eastern producers like Saudi Aramco and SOMO have even reduced prices amid uncertain global demand. That's all the news I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.
Disclaimer: this content is for informational purposes only. None of the stocks, brands, or products mentioned are recommendations or endorsements.